Happy Friday, everyone. Yeah, happy Friday. It's Friday after exam, which is kind of a relief Friday. Yeah. And so, yeah, although Fridays are always that tension because, you want to hear about auditing because who wouldn't? And, but you also want to enjoy your weekend. So we'll get to that. We've got a lot of people absent today. It's actually, it's not a complaint. It's just kind of observation. It's just, I had empty classrooms, fairly empty classrooms in this class and my morning class. Everybody is gone for legitimate reasons, just like everybody kind of had the same things going on. So I think Drew, Luca, Aiden were all going to the same conference, if I remember correctly. Some things happened. I've actually, my graduate students, I had like 3 students all sitting for one part of the CPA exam yesterday. So they were in St. Louis, which was easier than to stay there over the weekend. Anyway, I'm in a chatty mood today, so I apologize. I'll get to chatting about the topics. So a couple of quick notes. I do want to put some reminders in your calendar. I'm going to do my best to try to remind you as we go forward because we're in week 5. These things are not immediate. They're not coming up real soon, but they are coming up. And if I don't mention them now, then they will sneak up on you before you remember it. So please remember you have an Excel assignment. I believe that's due, I want to say week 12. I don't remember the exact date on that. That doesn't seem like it's really close, but it's something you should probably start taking a look at now, just to make sure that you get all your data set up. I encourage you to download the data as soon as possible so you have that accessible. You can actually start working on it now because it's a big analytical procedure and you know what analytical procedures are now. So that should be pretty straightforward. It is not, like I said, I say this many, many times and I repeat myself when I say it. It is not a difficult assignment. It is a time-consuming assignment. If you don't devote sufficient time to it, you will not complete it. If you don't complete it, then, well, things are bad all around. Also, we do have presentations at the end of the semester. This is the one class that I still retain group presentations. I guess I do that in my other auditing class too. And I think from an auditing perspective, it's really important to be able to work in groups, even if you don't necessarily know the people that you're working with well. If you have people that you want to be on a project team with, then reach out to them and say, hey, you want to be on a team with me? And if they say no, don't put them on your team. Actually, I don't really do that. They may probably say I'm in a group with somebody else already. This actually came up several years ago. I had one student who was assigned to 3 different teams. And I said, yeah, you can't do 3 different presentations. She was like, I didn't even realize I was in the other 2 groups. So she was in high demand, which I guess is good, but she didn't realize that she'd been drafted to other teams. So reach out and also take a look at the project topics that are online. You can select from those. Yes.
How many people are in the group?
We have 19 in the class, so it's going to be 4 to 5 because we're going to do 4 presentation groups. As always, if you have like 2 or 3 people that you want to be in a group, you don't have a full group, just let me know. I will assign you to a group and then I'll fill the gaps. If you don't have a preference, then I'll go ahead and randomly assign you to a group. I think that's pretty much up to date. So let's get talking about the professional judgment framework. So this is an interesting topic. This is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about, which I seem to say a lot in this course. I think I've been teaching it so long, I have a lot of favorite topics. But this goes back to kind of my old philosophy days, back when I was an undergraduate, and I really enjoyed my philosophy courses. This kind of resonates with that. It's particularly relevant nowadays, particularly with this day and age and how we operate so effectively via social networks and text messages and large communications. Is anybody on social media? If you don't raise your hand, good for you. Okay. I got on Facebook 20 years ago. It was the biggest mistake in my life, or at least one of them. I've actually thought about getting off of them, but they keep dragging me back. One of the things I just don't like about social media is it encourages bad behavior. If you are talking one-on-one with somebody and they have a disparaging point of view, you generally can articulate and come to some sort of compromise. If you engage on social media, then generally that's not the case. People are kind of backed in a wall and say, this is my point of view and you'll never convince me anything otherwise. It's like, okay, I guess we can't compromise then. I don't like that environment, and it only gets worse when you have larger crowds. Part of the reason that we see kind of some of the really, really extreme narratives that we've had is because this idea of mob mentality. And mob mentality basically tells us that you can have an extreme point of view that you will dismiss if you are by yourself. But if you have a few people around you who share the same points of view and it gets vocalized, and all of a sudden, it's like a completely reasonable perspective. You can probably identify, again, I'm not trying to pick on any particular political ideology. I want to clarify that however you believe is however you believe, and I respect that. But on both sides, there's definitely extreme points of view, and it's very, very difficult to come to a compromise when you have an extreme point of view. So I have written here my notes, and this is something that's not going to be on the exam, but I do think it's an important life lesson. Mob mentality is the enemy of professional judgment. And given that this is a course all about professional judgment, we probably want to avoid the idea of mob mentality. So that's going to be one of the first lessons. Also, I do firmly believe, I believe this for a long time, even before I started teaching this course, that there is a big difference between intelligence and common sense. I have taught some of the most intelligent students in probably that I've had any experience with, very, very high intelligence, but they ask me questions and I'm kind of like, really? You know, it's more about life learning and life lessons and how you actually utilize your intelligence. I'm not going to pick on anybody at Truman because the simple truth is that Truman students are pretty strong in both of those, to be honest. But I will pick on an older roommate of mine. I had an old roommate who was very, very bright. He could take a piece of literature and memorize it and then regurgitate it back to you in a few minutes. He just had this incredible capacity for being able to learn things, but he could never actually parlay those things into actually good decision making. Like, I know how to create a budget. I don't understand the application of a budget. And it's like, well, you're missing half the picture if you can't do that. All right. So there's a big difference between intelligence and common sense. It's kind of the same idea between memorization and learning. Remember on the exam, I told you, don't memorize these concepts. Know these concepts. And you say, what's the difference? It's like, well, you can tell me the names of each of the assertions, but if you don't know what they mean, the names are irrelevant. So I think that that's an important concept to take away. And learning generally involves this idea of professional judgment and critical thinking. And this is actually becoming more and more pronounced in time because we've got this big thing called AI. Maybe you've heard about it. Right? AI is going to be very, very prominent in the future, especially as you all move to the workforce. And your value proposition as work candidates is going to be, what can you add to what AI provides? AI can provide a list of resources. Can you actually evaluate those resources and be able to understand what is relevant, what is not? It also helps that you can identify hallucinations. I was joking around with my forensics class yesterday, and I think it was yesterday. I was doing a search for a particular commercial that appeared in a series of movies. And so this is a commercial from the late 1970s, early 1980s, a commercial series, I should say. It appeared in Saturday Night Fever and a movie called Splash with Tom Hanks from the early 1980s. And then it listed Casablanca as one of the movies. And I'm like, oh. Casablanca came out in 1942. This particular retail chain didn't open until 1969. I think this may be a hallucination. So not particularly relevant to this course or this content, but it is important to note that you do need to be able to identify when AI is wrong. All right, do need to be able to think about that. Like, that was a pretty easy one because I'd heard of the movie Casablanca before, and I was like, yeah, Humphrey Bogart, I don't think was pushing computers. Yeah, just don't think that was happening. And then there's the idea that when we make decisions, that we tend to conflate those with making judgments. So do we think that making a decision and making a judgment are the same thing? What do you guys think? We tend to use those interchangeably, but are they interchangeable? All right, let me ask you this, all right? So I'm so impressed with your performance in the exam that I'm going to say I'm going to take the entire class out for a meal after this. I know it's just a little bit late, but it's free food, okay? I'm not doing this, by the way. This is completely hypothetical, but I'm taking the entire class out for a meal, all right? And I say, where are we going to go? And half of the class says, okay, well, we're going to go to Maxwell's because, you all demonstrate good judgment. The other half of the class says, Taco Bell. And I'm like, yeah, never. Why? So it's completely split down the middle, so we flip a coin. And it comes up heads and it's Taco Bell and I'm in misery, all right? So is that making a decision? Yes, okay, that is making a decision. Is that making a judgment? It is not making a judgment. It did not use any critical identifiable details such as Taco Bell is inedible to actually make the proper decision, all right? So that's actually a big difference. And again, I will even use them interchangeably. I just used the word decision just a second ago to describe it when it wasn't. It was really a judgment. So we do need to articulate and understand. So let's start this off. Let's talk about how we frame information. And this is really important for understanding the details of what we're going to be looking at moving forward. There was a big sports game on TV last Sunday. Did everybody catch that? Okay. And I don't know if you were aware, but there may have been some controversy surrounding the Super Bowl halftime show. Does anybody hear about that? Okay. All right. So one thing I like to do is I like to look at common issues of the day, and I look at it through three sources. I look at CNN, which is kind of the moderate source. They tend to report things fairly objectively. You may argue, well, they're left leaning, Dr. Barnes, so they're right leaning. I mean, for the most part, they're kind of an impartial news source. Then we've got two on the other ends that are completely and totally off that. Huffington Post was created by Arianna Huffington, very, very liberal in focus, okay? Tends to espouse a liberal worldview. Whereas the Blaze, I don't think it's called the Blaze, it's actually called Blaze Media now, but I haven't bothered to update my slides, is Glenn Beck's organization, which Glenn Beck used to be associated with Fox News, but he was too extreme for Fox News, so they got rid of him. You can kind of tell where we're going with this. What I would like you to do is I want you to match the headline to the source, all right? Keeping those in mind. Okay, these are all about the Super Bowl halftime show. The first headline is what we know about Bad Bunny's Super Bowl halftime show. What do you think that came from? CNN, yes, a very objective statement. No real direction one to the other. Okay, let's go to this next one. Bad Bunny enjoying Super Bowl moment, no mention of ice with press. Still a pretty objective one, but it does have a little bit of a slant to it. What do you think? That's Huffington Post. That was Huffington Post. And this probably last one is probably pretty obvious. Okay. How to watch Turning Point USA Super Bowl halftime show. American culture, freedom and faith. Yeah. So that was the Blaze. That was the Blaze headline. All right. Can we objectively view these as different things? They're all about the same topic, but they definitely have different connotations to them. And that's an important point to take. Now, this is going to be a relevant understanding is that when we look at particular issues, we need to understand that not everybody views things the same way. I know that's not a very profound statement, but it's particularly relevant in auditing when we start talking about tendencies and biases in the way that we work. So if you go to the book, they actually have a discussion on this thing called the professional judgment framework, right? And this starts on page 741 in Appendix A. You were not required to read through this because I'm only going to ask one multiple question on it. It's going to be over a specific series of topics. But if you're very interested in the idea of professional judgment and how to actually set up a framework, I think this is a good resource for you. I actually really enjoyed reading it. I don't usually enjoy reading technical stuff, but I think that KPMG, who created this monograph, did a really nice job. This is one of the few times that I'm going to say KPMG did a nice job. By the way, I worked at KPMG, so what's that?
Oh, authorization.
Yeah, exactly. So KPMG did a nice job with authoring the monograph, but it's not, you will hear me give KPMG a lot of hard times, of course, because I used to work for them, and they didn't always they set their toe wrong several times. So this is the diagram with respect to the professional judgment framework. This is kind of the steps of the framework, and I don't think you need to know this. This is not the thing that I want you to learn. You don't need to memorize this. I think that this framework is relatively intuitive. So the question is, why is it important that we talk about this? If there's a framework and there's steps in the framework, why do we bother with it if I'm saying it's fairly intuitive? If you already know how to use good judgment, why do we do it? And the answer is because we don't instinctively use judgment in all things. Now, as an example of this, okay, did everybody wake up this morning? Okay, I'm going to assume if you're here, you woke up this morning, okay? You may still be asleep. So not really, Dr. Barnes. Your voice is dragging me down, all right? That's fair. That's fair. But everybody woke up this morning. So when you woke up, did you kind of open your eyes and say, all right, I could get out on the left side of the bed. It's a little bit warmer, okay, but my slippers are on the right side of the bed. I'm not really sure which is the proper decision. I have to walk around to get my slippers, but then again, my feet would be warm if I open on the left side. Did you think about that? You just got up and got out of bed, didn't you? Okay, all right. We don't think about a large amount of the decisions that we make. We just do things. We just do things instinctively. It's called operating by heuristic. Has anybody heard the term heuristic before? A heuristic is just basically shorthand for mental shortcut. We do that for most things that we do. When we get into a routine, we just kind of operate by rotes, which is perfectly reasonable for most of the things that we do in our life. Not a very good idea for things that we require really, really detailed judgment. And yet, we still usually operate by heuristic when it comes to judgment. One of the things that I talked about ideology, people with really extreme ideological views tend to operate by ideology, whether it makes sense or not. And so we have to be aware of that, particularly in the sense we're going to be going into an occupation. I'm not talking about auditing, I'm talking about accounting in general, an occupation where judgment is really, really important. So we need to understand how to operate and use the judgment. So let's go ahead and start out talking about something that I really like to talk about is how to maintain objectivity. So being objective is not something that's really found in this day and age. I say that, and I think I sound like an old man shouting at a cloud when I do that, because I think that being objective is difficult in any day and age. There's just so many external stimuli that kind of force you in one direction or the other. And being objective, being able to accept multiple points of view, I really felt that was a level up in my life when I said, you know what? I have my opinions and my preferences, but I can recognize and acknowledge other people's opinions and preferences, and I think they're valid. Okay, even if I didn't agree with them, I think they're valid. That's a really important aspect of just being a good human being, but it's really important to an auditor because if you have certain things that you want to happen with respect to an audit, and those things don't happen, does that mean the world is coming to an end? It may mean that you have to do more work or that you have got some issues or concerns with the clients, but you do have to know when there's a danger issue coming up and how to address that. So maintaining objectivity kind of has its roots in a Greek philosophy called dosoi logoi. Okay, if you've ever taken a philosophy class, you may have engaged in this. Dosoi logoi is one of my favorite things, and if you take a graduate course with me, you will experience this a lot. Okay, I use this tool a lot. So what is dosoi logoi? The answer is that you should be able to make arguments from both perspectives, and you've probably done that in some of your courses that says, okay, what is an argument in favor of this? What is an argument against this? That's kind of a modern day example of dosoi logoi. So the idea being is that you should be able to articulate multiple points of view, both perspectives. If there's two perspectives, multiple perspectives, if there's more than one. Is anybody familiar with the video game series Civilization? Has anybody heard of that? Okay. I'm a longtime Civilization player. I played the original Civilization back when it came out in 1990, which the fact that the video game series is like 36 years old just blows my mind. But they're in Civilization 7 now. This one's actually an interesting one from Civilization 5. It was actually narrated by Leonard Nimoy, and I can still hear his voice in my head. When you unlocked education, it actually had this quote from Aristotle. It's the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. And I've always thought that was a really great statement. All right, it's 2,000 years old, because Aristotle's back in ancient Greece. But it's a really important one for us as auditors and accountants to be able to entertain as well, to understand. So how do we maintain objectivity? One of the goals of that is to be able to understand that we've got to be able to avoid judgment traps. So what do I mean by judgment trap? And those are basically shortcuts that prevent us from getting to the right conclusion, to the correct conclusion. First of these that I want to talk about is something called the rush to solve. Have you ever been in a hurry to get to a conclusion about something and you didn't necessarily make the right decision based on the need for haste? So there's actually a movie that was released it was directed by Clint Eastwood. It was a few years old. I think it's 2021, 2020. It's called Richard Jewell. Had anybody heard of that film or seen it? So Richard Jewell was a security guard in the 1996 Atlanta Olympics. And if you don't know anything about the Atlanta Olympics, one of the big things that happened, big events that happened in the Atlanta Olympics is there was a bombing in the Olympic Square. And so what was notable about that is that Richard Jewell, as a security guard, he actually saw the bomb and he notified people, get out of here, get out of here. There's something that I don't know. And he basically saved hundreds of lives. I think they estimated at least 100 lives, if not more. So the FBI comes in and says, we've got to figure out who the bomber is. We've got to do it fast because the Olympics are going to let out in 2 weeks. And we've only got a limited time frame. Who do you think their number one suspect was? Richard Jewell. You only heard one name. So it was Richard Jewell. Okay, Richard Jewell. And I don't want to spoil things for you if you want to watch the movie, but Richard Jewell didn't do it. Okay. He was a hero in the racist sense of the word, and he got right through the coals completely and totally because everybody said, all right, we're going to solve this now. He's our prime suspect. That's what we're focusing on. That's a big judgment trap that kind of cost. And the problem is Richard Jewell passed away in 2001, and basically he never got his acclaim or his acknowledgement, which is a big tragedy because if you saved 100 lives, then everybody will like, you are awesome. You are my hero. All right. And yeah, that's kind of a shame. He did get a movie made about him, which I guess is kind of cool. But, yeah, that's kind of an example of the rush to solve. There's also something called solving the wrong problem, which relates to judgment triggers. Trying to see what, okay, yeah, judgment triggers. So basically, we look at a problem and we tend to identify ready solutions that are not necessarily the correct solutions. So there was an example in the professional, I'm going to draw one from the professional judgment framework that was in the book. They talk about this company called Axe Snack Company. And They're competing with a company called Bob's, and they're losing market share, and they think it's because Bob's has distinctive packaging, and so they rebrand their entire company and they basically redo the packaging of their company. And guess what it does for their sales? Absolutely nothing. It doesn't affect their sales whatsoever. It doesn't affect their sales whatsoever. Because they find out a little bit later on that the reason that Bob's is so successful is because they use smaller portion sizes, which appeal to a market who want snacks on the go. And so they said, let's find an easy solution, but it's not necessarily the correct solution. All right. So being able to solving the wrong problem is definitely one of those things that we tend to be very, very bad at. I don't want to say good at because that's something we do, but it's a very bad thing for us to do. And it comes from the idea that we can identify what the source of the problem is without doing any research. There's also this idea of judgment framing, which I've already alluded to. So judgment framing says that there are multiple perspectives to a particular issue. You may have heard this parable. Has anybody heard of the elephant and the six blind men? So you want to go to watch YouTube. I'm not going to do it in this class. There's actually a YouTube video that does the elephant and six blind men, but short, sweet. Basically, there's an elephant and there's six blind men. This is a Chinese tale. There's six blind men along the road, and they encounter the elephant, and they all touch the elephant and are trying to discern the nature of the elephant. And you can see one of them is touching the tusk and says, "Oh, the elephant's a pipe." Another one's touching a tusk or the trunk, and he's like, "Oh, the elephant's like a snake." Another one's touching the ear and saying the elephant's like a fan. So they start arguing about it, and then somebody walks along the road and say, "What are you all doing?" He says, "We're trying to describe the nature of the elephant." He says, "Well, you're all right, but you have an incomplete picture." And that was kind of the idea, is that if you only look at one perspective, one point of view, then you are not seeing the big picture overall. So the idea behind it is that you want to actually be able to readjust and operate from something called a fresh lens, right? Does anybody in here like sushi? I really enjoy sushi. I will admit I'm spoiled. I don't like Kirksville sushi. It's fine, okay, it's fine, but we're so far away from the coast that I get really, really spoiled. Because the first sushi I had was actually at Nobu in Dallas. If you've ever heard of Nobu, Nobu's like a really, really fancy, swanky place. And yeah, that was kind of that. And everything's kind of been downhill from there. I've had good sushi since then, but like the stuff that you get from the package in Hy-Vee, good, but it's fine. They do a good job. I'm not trying to badmouth it. It's just, you don't start at a 10 and then move down to a 4. Okay, that's just not a good idea. But one of my big problems with sushi is that nasty pink stuff that they serve alongside it. I don't even know what that nasty pink stuff is called. Pickled ginger. What is the purpose of pickled ginger? Don't tell me that. Okay. Palate cleanser. Yeah. So sushi oftentimes has a very, very powerful flavor. If you're eating a piece of tuna, you don't want the flavor and the scent of the tuna to overpower the other tuna that you eat. So you basically are supposed to chew on this rancid stuff that they serve alongside it. I hate pickled ginger, by the way, you can tell. All right. I understand the purpose of it, but yeah, it's hard for me to get overget my hate for it. But you chew on the stuff, and basically it's such an extreme flavor that it clears your palate, and then you can enjoy the next piece of sushi after that. That's the goal. So it's basically a fresh lens. It's the culinary equivalent of a fresh lens. We can enjoy everything from a new perspective, right, once we actually clear what our current perception is. All right. Now, if you were taking notes or you're paying close attention, you're saying, what is he going to ask us a question on? I really, really want to know that. Here's the point. We're going to get to that, okay? We're going to talk about 4 mental shortcuts. And you've probably heard of these before. They're probably termed as biases or tendencies. There are 4 distinct mental shortcuts and tendencies. Now, I'm not going to say this is a comprehensive list. These are the ones that are given in the judgment framework, and I think they represent a good cross-section. But we need to understand and distinguish why they're important, how they're relevant to auditing, and how you can tell the difference between them, all right? So the first one is called the availability tendency or the availability bias. Has anybody heard of that before? I know you're all fairly educated, so you probably encountered that at some point before. But what does that mean? And it means exactly as it sounds, that we restrict our decision-making or our judgments to information that's readily available. So if we're part of these groups on Facebook that talk about one particular topic, and then somebody asks a question, we're going to say, I'm going to use the information that's readily available within this group, and I'm never going to go outside and look at other external sources to come up with it. All right. So again, that restricts the efficacy of our ability to be able to make a decision because we don't look at alternative points of information. So availability tendency or availability bias. Then we have something called the confirmation tendency or confirmation bias. So let me back up real quick. So how is this relevant to auditing? How is availability tendency relevant to auditing? Well, Oftentimes when we start out a new engagement, right, a new year for an audit, we oftentimes use a lot of the old information before. There's actually an old acronym called SALY, S-A-L-Y. How do we do something? Same as last year, SALY. Okay. So that's something that restricts our availability. It's like if we're trying to do or restricts our view due to availability. Because if we're trying to do a particular task, we may perform it in exactly the same way we've done it in a previous year. And we don't actually look at new sources of information or new types of data, even if we think that something might have profoundly changed that would require us to do that. All right, so the next thing is called a confirmation tendency or confirmation bias, which you've probably heard of before, all right? Confirmation tendency or confirmation bias. And this basically means that we restrict our judgment or decision making to information that agrees with our current perspective, our existing perspective. So that's that mob mentality thing all over again. We believe some way, then we're going to look at information that kind of agrees with that. Now, there's ideological firestorms I could bring up here because ideology is very heavily rooted in confirmation bias. I'm not going to because I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want anybody saying Dr. Barnes is trying to promote a point of view that I didn't agree with. No, that's not what my goal is here. My goal is to make you aware of confirmation tendency and confirmation bias. So how does this relate to auditing? Okay, well, if you're in an audit and you've been working on a testing area in one particular area, let's say you're doing AR confirmation testing, accounts receivable confirmation testing, and you've gotten through like 200 confirmations. You're on 201 and it's your last confirmation. And if this confirmation works out, then you don't have to do any more testing. If it doesn't work out, you're going to have to expand the scope of your testing. And you've already worked on it for hours on end. You've still got more work to do. And the final confirmation doesn't work. Are you going to be a little bit bummed and sad about that? You're going to pick up your stuff and say, all right, do more work. I'm going to go ahead and work for a few more hours. Or are you going to be like, can I just fudge this? Can I throw this one in? Can I do a different sample? Can I do something to get past this? I really don't want to do more testing. Confirmation is very strong. It's like you're kind of saying, I really don't want to work on this again. By the way, I didn't pick confirmations because the word confirmation was in it. It was just kind of a happy coincidence. Yeah, if you basically are put in a situation you don't want to do something, you may be incentivized to avoid that. That's certainly problematic because we're not being objective in that regard. All right. Next is something called the overconfidence tendency or overconfidence bias. All right. Now, I'm not going to raise my hand because nobody will raise their hand if I ask this question because I've done it in many semesters and I've gotten to the point nobody will do it. But I want you to think about whether or not you think you are above average. All right. I'm not talking about outside of it. Everybody in this room is above average relative to the general population, but I'm talking about relative to this room. Okay. All right. Let's assume that everybody says yes. Half of you are wrong. Statistically speaking, half of you are wrong. Okay. Which is a really sobering thought. That's not something we like to think about. We like to think that we're perfectly capable. And I would think that in general terms that everybody in this room is capable to a high degree at many tasks. But as far as comparative analysis in this room, and I think that also we tend to be a little bit overconfident about our own abilities in areas that it's very, very, very easy to identify, though not necessarily obvious. Has anybody heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? If you've never heard of that, go to Wikipedia and look up the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's fascinating, okay? But Dunning-Kruger effect basically says that we as individuals tend to assign social knowledge to our own set of knowledge. So an example of this, if I say, do you know how a zipper works? How many people in this room are going to say, yeah, I know how a zipper works. I use one every day. Everybody's going to nod their heads and I'm going to say, okay, explain it to me. And then you're going to be like, good question, Dr. Barnes. I'm not sure. I really
autistic for you to ask.
Oh, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again. So how about if I say, how does the toilet work? So use toilet multiple times a day. I mean, come on, it's very easy. You just touch the flush. All right, explain the mechanism of the toilet for me. You'll be like, oh, yeah. See what I mean? See what I mean? Social knowledge is not individual knowledge. That's something that we're not very capable at. And it becomes much worse the more complex society gets because we think that the easy mechanisms are allusions to the harder mechanisms, but they're not. And we can see that in certain ways, like we understand how to drive a car, but how to fix a car, that's so foreign to me, even despite the best efforts of my father, fixing a car is completely foreign to me, all right? So that's going to be something that I admit that I do not have confidence in, so I did not adapt to overconfidence in that regard area. So overconfidence, how does it relate to an audit? Well, you may be in a senior position and you may assign personnel to do the work that are not capable of doing that work. You may have high regard for their abilities, but they don't have the experience or the knowledge necessary to do the work. You need to be very realistic about the work that's being performed. Final tendency we're going to talk about is something called the anchoring tendency, which is very similar to the availability tendency, anchoring tendency or anchoring bias. Now, the key to understanding the anchoring tendency or anchoring bias is this idea of using a quantitative anchor. We start at some value and then we don't move far enough away from it. So, easy example of this: you're interviewing for a job because many of you are going to be looking for jobs out there in the near future. Okay, and you're telling all your qualifications as well. I've got a degree in accounting from a highly esteemed institution. I spent a lot of time working on that. I did very well in my courses. Dr. Barnes said I was good. All right. That's going to be a big resume builder. All right. And then, so you do spout out all your credentials and show why you're skilled for the job. And they say, well, all right. I used to have my brother-in-law doing this. He had no degree or no work skill whatsoever. I paid him $12 an hour. Will that work for you? What are you going to say? You're going to say, thank you for your time. I'm going to go elsewhere. That is what you say, by the way, if that comes up, okay? That's what you're going to say. Or you can say, I think I deserve a little bit more. I mean, $12 an hour won't cover my breathing costs, so much less what I deserve. So $12 an hour, not enough for your skill. You all are worth more than that, everybody in this room. Okay? Maybe not me, but everybody else in this room. Maybe everybody else in the room. All right. But what was the rationalization behind using $12? That was what he paid previously. That was his anchor. Okay, that was his starting point. He said, $12 what I paid previously. It doesn't matter that his brother-in-law, who has no degree, no experience in the field, is completely and totally outclassed by your superb skill. He was operating from a bias. I actually really enjoy this cartoon. This is in the slides. Okay, this is Eve and the serpent in the Garden of Eden. This is Eve, you should eat the apple, but I'm not supposed to. That's fine. You wouldn't want it. It costs $400. Oh, okay. It's probably a good thing. Wait, it's only $4. Oh my. I didn't really want it now, but my assessment of the apple's value is anchored to the high number you stated initially. And the serpent is laughing in the background. Ha ha. And then earlier, he's like God talking to the serpent. And he's like, are you reading the Necronomicon again? It says, no, that's kid stuff. You can't read it down there. It says behavioral economics. Yeah.
Behavioral economics. Now I can speak. This is true.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah. So that quantitative anchor tends to skew decision making. So if we start with a particular number and don't move far enough away from it, then we make uninformed decisions. All right. So yeah, just a shortcut or just a summary. We have availability tendency, confirmation tendency, overconfidence tendency, and anchoring tendency. These are the 4 items that I will test you on the exam. By the way, that's where the multiple choice question comes from because I limit this. I'm not saying everything else doesn't have value, but I do think these are the most important takeaways. So what is it that we can actually do to mitigate the effect of judgment biases? Well, first of all, we can employ a questioning mind. That's kind of that due professional care and professional skepticism we talked about. We want to suspend judgment until we have all the facts and all the details. We want to actively search for knowledge, make sure we get as much information as relevant as possible. We want to engage in personal understanding, say, this individual is not me, so they shouldn't necessarily behave the way that I do or believe the same things I do. Autonomy is a really important one that goes kind of unnoticed, but you should be confident in your own assessments and believe that you have the ability to make good decisions on your own. You do not need to operate according to other people's biases or preconceived notions. And then have the self-esteem. It's kind of the same idea. You should be able to operate independently, and you should be able to confident in your own decisions. So those are some ways that we can actually mitigate judgment bias. Probably the most important one is just to be aware that they exist. Everybody in this room has an existing bias, multiple biases. If you're aware of the biases, they become a lot less profound an effect on your decision making and your judgments. All right, with that, we are done for lecture. Now to the main event.